The story begins with sound, faint, distant, and haunting. Through the static of an old analog recording, a soft hum rises, followed by the echo of a choir. The harmony is eerily perfect, almost mechanical in its precision, yet soaked in something deeply human: pain, devotion, longing. It's the kind of sound that seeps under your skin before you even realize what you're hearing. Then, as the melody swells, the static fades for just a moment, and the voices merge into a single, chilling note that seems to vibrate in your bones. That was the opening of what researchers would later call the St. Agnes tape. A recording discovered by accident in 1973, sealed within the walls of a monastery that hadn't seen a living soul in nearly 30 years. The man who found it, an audio engineer named Dr. Leon Wojcik, would describe it as a song that felt alive. At first, everyone thought it was just another relic of post-war Europe, a forgotten piece of music history, maybe an unfinished Gregorian chant. But it wasn't that. It couldn't be. Because when the tape was analyzed, it revealed something no one could explain. The frequencies on the reel didn't match any known vocal range. The harmonics didn't correspond to male or female tones, not even to human ones. According to every scientific metric, the sound wasn't produced by human vocal cords at all. Yet, there it was, a choir of voices singing with perfect synchronization, in a language that seemed ancient and modern all at once. Imagine being the person who first heard it, sitting alone in a dimly lit lab, as the tape spun and the air filled with those voices. At first, it might have sounded beautiful, tragic even, like the echo of angels trapped inside the recording. But the longer you listened, the more wrong it began to feel. The melody shifted ever so slightly, almost as if the song was aware of its listener. As if it was adjusting itself to you. The existence of this tape should have been impossible. It wasn't listed in any archives, nor was there any record of the equipment used to make it. The monastery where it was found had been abandoned since World War II, its stone walls half collapsed, its chapel roof caved in. The entire area had been declared unsafe, off-limits to civilians. No power source, no instruments, and certainly no choir. And yet, this recording existed, trapped inside that forgotten reel. When snippets of the tape leaked to journalists years later, the world reacted with fascination and disbelief. Some claimed it was a hoax, an elaborate fabrication designed to mimic ancient polyphonic chants. Others insisted it was genuine proof of the supernatural, the first real evidence of sound from beyond death. Religious groups called it the echo of divine suffering. Skeptics called it an auditory illusion born of grief. But no one could explain one thing: how the recording was made in a place with no electricity, using voices that belonged to no one. In interviews, Dr. Wojcik would only say that the tape wasn't recorded, it was found. It was waiting there, he told a reporter once. As if someone, or something, wanted to be heard again. His colleagues laughed, calling it poetic madness. But Leon's expression during that interview told a different story. There was no pride in his voice, no satisfaction of discovery, only fear. When the recording was sent to the University of Warsaw for acoustic analysis, the technicians made a startling discovery. Within the waveform of the choir's harmonics, there was a repeating pattern, something like a heartbeat. At first, they assumed it was an artifact of the tape's degradation, but when they isolated it, the rhythm remained steady, almost human. The frequency corresponded to a resting pulse rate of 60 beats per minute. The choir was alive, at least in sound. From that moment, the recording became more than just a mystery, it became an obsession. Musicians, scientists, priests, and even government agencies requested copies. Everyone wanted to decode it, to find meaning in the impossible. But those who listened for too long reported strange effects: vivid dreams of cathedrals that didn't exist, whispers echoing from radios left unplugged, feelings of being watched. Still, fascination overcame fear. A handful of researchers, including Leon, devoted their careers to uncovering the origins of this unholy hymn. But before anyone could reach a conclusion, Leon vanished, taking with him the only surviving master copy of the tape. In the years since, fragments have surfaced online, snippets of the original melody buried in static and distortion. They say if you listen long enough, beneath the choir's endless harmony, you can hear something faint, something almost like breathing. A trembling exhale between notes. And those who've studied the spectral data agree on one final, horrifying detail. When they isolated the frequencies that corresponded to the human voice, they found traces of respiration patterns, but no vocal cord resonance. The people who sang on that tape didn't use their voices at all. They had none. To understand the origin of the St. Agnes tape, we have to go back, decades before its discovery, to a time when southern Poland was a scarred landscape of war, faith, and silence. In the late 1960s, a small team of archaeologists and historians began excavating the ruins of what had once been the St. Agnes Monastery, a remote religious compound buried in the foothills outside Krakow. The site had been forgotten for years, sealed off by the government after the war. Locals avoided it, calling it the Chapel of Breathless Saints. The monastery's history was obscure even by Polish archival standards. Founded in the early 1800s, it was said to have housed an order of nuns who cared for orphans, children displaced by famine, war, and plague. But in 1941, during the Nazi occupation, the monastery was seized and repurposed as a medical holding facility. Documents from the Red Cross and post-war recovery teams described it as a re-education ward for war-affected miners. Yet, no official records of its occupants ever surfaced. By 1945, the monastery was bombed, the upper floors destroyed, and whatever remained was sealed beneath rubble and silence. When the excavation team arrived in 1969, they expected to find nothing more than remnants of Gothic architecture, maybe old chalices, hymnals, and fragments of stained glass. But as the workers dug deeper, they uncovered peculiar things. In the center of the chapel's ruins, where the altar once stood, they found the remnants of iron chains bolted into the stone floor. Nearby lay fragments of metal rods, their tips curved and hollow, like parts of an organ, but smaller, designed for something precise and deliberate. The lead archaeologist, Professor Amelia Nowak, noted that the site felt unnaturally quiet. Even the wind seemed to avoid the hollow walls. Her journal, later recovered by her grandson, described how the workers began hearing faint sounds, low vibrations, distant hums, whenever they reached certain depths. At first, they thought it was the echo of their own tools, but then one worker swore he heard singing. The singing was faint, almost like the wind passing through a flute, but undeniably melodic. It came from beneath the old chapel, under layers of sealed stone. The man who heard it was named Tomasz, a local laborer. He claimed that when he pressed his ear against the cold marble, he could make out children's voices, soft, rhythmic, and sorrowful. They were praying, he said later. Or begging. Professor Nowak dismissed the story at first, chalking it up to exhaustion and imagination. But the next morning, several workers refused to return. One man claimed that the singing followed him home, another swore he heard humming near his window that night. The project was briefly halted when Tomasz collapsed during excavation, suffering from a panic attack so severe he had to be hospitalized. He said he heard someone whisper his name in the dark beneath the chapel. The team finally broke through to an underground chamber, small and circular, lined with the remnants of wooden pews. On one wall was a crude fresco, faded but still visible. It showed a group of children in white robes, standing before a figure with outstretched arms. The figure wasn't Christ or any saint known to Catholic iconography, its face was blank, its mouth open, emitting rays of sound instead of light. The Latin inscription below translated roughly to, "the Word without flesh." What truly disturbed the excavation team, however, was what they found in the center of the chamber. There, sealed in stone, was a narrow recess, almost like a tomb. Inside lay fragments of wiring, corroded by moisture, and the rusted remains of recording reels, ancient, unmarked, and fused into the rock as if they had been deliberately entombed. The Polish Ministry of Culture took over the site, classifying it as a protected historical zone. Officially, it was described as a war-era recording experiment, possibly related to early psychological studies on trauma rehabilitation. Unofficially, it was whispered that the nuns of St. Agnes had conducted forbidden rituals, merging faith, music, and primitive science in an attempt to heal the mute and the maimed. Locals began retelling an old legend that resurfaced after the excavation, the story of the choir of the voiceless. According to village folklore, the monastery once housed dozens of mute orphans rescued from Nazi experiments. Unable to speak, the nuns taught them to sing through faith alone. The children would stand in the chapel at midnight, holding hands, and the room would fill with harmony, music that seemed to emerge from the walls themselves. To outsiders, these were just tales, warped by grief and superstition. But the villagers swore that on cold winter nights, if you stood near the monastery ruins, you could still hear faint echoes of their hymns drifting through the wind. Voices that never died, they said. Because they were never alive to begin with. In 1970, funding for the excavation was abruptly pulled. No explanation was ever given. The site was resealed, the research notes confiscated by the government, and Professor Nowak's report was never published. But before the monastery was closed off for good, one final entry appeared in her field journal. It read simply, "We found something behind the chapel wall. A hollow space. The sound was loud tonight." The next year, the government would authorize a preservation survey of the site, and send an acoustic engineer named Dr. Leon Wojcik to study the ruins. He would be the one to find the hidden chamber. He would be the one to find the tape. And the moment he pressed play, the silence that had lingered over St. Agnes for 3 decades would finally be broken. In the spring of 1973, a gentle but persistent rain swept across southern Poland, turning the monastery ruins of St. Agnes into a landscape of dripping stone and glistening mud. It was on one of those gray, mist-soaked mornings that Dr. Leon Wojcik arrived at the site, a man in his early 40s, tall, quiet, and known for his unusual sensitivity to sound. A decorated acoustic engineer from the University of Warsaw, Leon was not a religious man, but he carried an almost spiritual reverence for what he called the soul of vibration. He had spent much of his career analyzing echoes in abandoned cathedrals and churches, claiming that every structure, every wall, remembers the sound it has heard. His assignment was simple on paper: document and preserve any remaining audio or acoustic artifacts from the ruined monastery before restoration crews began demolition. It was routine work. But Leon's personal journal, later recovered by his daughter, revealed that he felt something strange the moment he stepped into the chapel's remains. The air, he wrote, had weight. Not humidity, not dust, something else. It was as if the walls were listening. The chapel's walls were cracked but still mostly intact, their plaster peeling like old parchment. Leon began by mapping out the acoustic response of the interior, tapping the walls with a mallet, recording how sound bounced back. But on the 4th wall, behind what used to be the altar, the echo came back wrong. It didn't disperse evenly. Instead, it seemed to absorb the sound. Curious, Leon ran a frequency sweep test, sending a tone through a speaker and recording the reflections. At one particular frequency, the tone seemed to vanish entirely. He marked the spot, instructed his assistant to bring tools, and began removing chunks of the wall with care. Beneath the plaster, buried within a pocket of dry cement, lay a corroded metal casing roughly the size of a small box. Inside it was something wrapped in decayed linen. When Leon peeled away the fabric, his heart nearly stopped. It was a reel-to-reel magnetic tape recorder, the kind used in the late 1940s, sealed in place like an offering. The machine was partially fused by time, wires rusted, switches stuck, but astonishingly, the reels themselves were intact. Leon brushed off the dust, carefully extracted the tape, and noted that the label bore a simple handwritten inscription, Gloria Dei 4:44. That evening, Leon took the tape back to his temporary quarters in Krakow, determined to listen. His assistant, a young technician named Marek, tried to dissuade him. "It's probably nothing," Marek said. "Old mass recording, maybe." A choir piece. But Leon was already setting up his playback deck, his hands trembling with anticipation. He knew the rules: every tape this old had to be cleaned, inspected, rehydrated. But something in him couldn't wait. He needed, to hear it. When he pressed play, the speakers crackled with static. Then, slowly, the sound emerged. At first, it was faint, like air being drawn through stone corridors. Then came rhythm, soft pulses, rising tones, until finally, the sound of voices. Dozens of them. A choir. But not like any choir Leon had ever heard. The harmony was too complex, the timing too precise, each note overlapping yet perfectly structured, creating dissonance and beauty all at once. The effect was hypnotic, like a living cathedral breathing in song. Leon froze. His skin prickled. He turned to Merrick, but Merrick looked pale, almost frightened. The sound was growing louder, as if the recording was responding to their attention. Then, buried deep within the choir's resonance, Leon heard something unmistakable, his own name. He slammed the stop button, the reel screeching to a halt. "You heard that?" he whispered. Merrick nodded slowly, his voice shaking. "It said, Leon." They sat in silence for several minutes before Leon replayed the section. The voices swelled again, but this time the name wasn't there. The choir's tone had changed, higher, more urgent, as if scolding them for stopping. Leon tried to analyze what he heard. Maybe it was pareidolia, the brain's tendency to find patterns where none exist. But his scientific curiosity was hooked. He stayed up all night running the audio through his spectrum analyzer. What he found made no sense. The frequency range extended beyond human vocal capacity, dipping into subsonic and ultrasonic layers simultaneously. There were no breath patterns, no throat resonance, no plosive sounds, just pure, sustained harmonics. It was impossible. The next day, Leon brought the tape to the university lab for a more detailed examination. His colleagues gathered around, half skeptical, half intrigued. When they ran a spectrogram of the audio, the computer displayed something incredible. Instead of the usual chaotic waveform, the harmonics formed symmetrical, fractal-like shapes, patterns resembling the geometric layouts of ancient cathedrals. The structure of the sound mirrored the design of sacred architecture. One professor called it a mathematical miracle. Another called it nonsense dressed in mystery. But Leon didn't care what they thought. He knew he had found something that defied explanation, something not just recorded but encoded by forces unknown. Over the following weeks, Leon made several duplicate copies of the tape, fearing damage to the original. Yet, with every playback, the recording seemed subtly different. Sometimes the tempo slowed. Other times, new harmonics appeared, as if the music itself was evolving. It was during one of these late-night sessions that Leon began to hear whispers beneath the melody, faint, broken words in Polish and Latin, pleading for something he couldn't make out. He started keeping a notebook of what he heard. The sound moves like water, frequencies bend around emotion, they want to be remembered. His notes grew more erratic, the handwriting uneven. Colleagues noticed he was barely sleeping. Merrick, increasingly alarmed, suggested turning the tape over to the university archives. But Leon refused. "It's not a relic," he insisted. "It's alive." One night, Merrick woke to find Leon standing in the dark laboratory, the reel spinning on its own, though the power had been shut off for hours. The tape turned slowly, its reels whispering through the silence. Leon was staring at it, whispering back. Later, when asked what he said to the machine, he answered only, "I was asking them what they wanted." By the end of that month, the tape had already begun to consume him. And soon, it would consume everyone who tried to understand it. The last entry in Leon's lab journal, dated June 12, 1973, was just 6 words: "They are not gone. Just unheard." After discovering the tape, Leon Wojcik's life changed in ways none of his colleagues could have foreseen. At first, he was cautious, meticulous in his research, recording every playback, every anomaly, every subtle shift in the choir's sound. But as weeks turned into months, Leon's work began to consume him. His apartment became a chamber of obsession, shelves stacked with audio reels, frequency graphs pinned to walls, notebooks filled with spirals of symbols and quotations from scripture. Friends noticed he rarely slept, and when he did, he woke drenched in sweat, murmuring fragments of the recording. Leon began avoiding his peers. He stopped attending lectures and disappeared for days without explanation. His assistants described him as a man possessed by the sound. He spoke of the tape not as an artifact but as something living, an entity. They speak in harmony because they have no other voice, he told Merrick once. And I have to answer them. Merrick became concerned, seeing how Leon's mind was unraveling. The engineer started referring to the choir as the resonant ones, claiming they had been calling him since the moment he played the tape. He found what he called the whisper layer, a consistent, low-level subharmonic hidden within the choir's frequencies. When isolated and amplified, the whisper layer formed distinct phrases. The words were incomplete, fragmented, but recurring phrases such as, "return the song," and, "they are waiting," were clear. This discovery sparked a new wave of interest in the tape, attracting not only acoustic scientists but linguists, cryptographers, and even paranormal researchers. Among them was Dr. Marek Szymanski, a linguist fascinated by the fragment's language patterns. Marek believed the choir's song was layered with a language unknown to modern science, one that was both archaic and synthetic. "It's not just music," he said. "It's encoded speech. A message within the sound." The idea of a hidden message only deepened the mystery. Who could have created such a thing? Was it the work of the nuns of St. Agnes, as local legend suggested? Was it some lost experiment in acoustic technology from the war years? Or something else entirely, something beyond human understanding? Then came the unnerving reports. Several researchers began to experience auditory hallucinations after prolonged exposure to the fragments. Marek himself admitted that after listening to a copy late one night, he began hearing faint chanting even in silence. "It's in the air now," he said. "Like a memory of sound. It doesn't leave you." These claims echoed Leon Wojcik's own descriptions before his disappearance, that the choir was not simply recorded sound, but a living presence. By now, the St. Agnes fragments were no longer confined to academic study, they were part of a growing underground phenomenon. Copies circulated quietly among enthusiasts, their origins untraceable, often accompanied by warnings, "Do not listen alone. Do not listen in the dark." Some even claimed the fragments could alter consciousness, opening a doorway to something unseen. But the most chilling development came when Marek Szymanski analyzed the latest fragment. In the background of the choir, buried beneath layers of harmonics and whispers, he detected something unmistakable, a voice. A voice that was not part of the original recording. It was human. It was urgent. And it was calling his name. Marek recorded his findings and sealed them away. In his notes, he wrote simply, "They are speaking to us now. And they are patient." What the researchers did not yet understand was that the whispers and the static were not random. They were the choir's call. And the call was growing stronger. His obsession deepened when he began experimenting with playback conditions. He played the tape in empty rooms, in basements, inside old churches. Each time, the choir's tone shifted. Sometimes it was softer, almost mournful, other times, harsh and urgent, layered with whispers. Leon began documenting these changes, claiming the tape reacted to the environment and to him personally. "It listens," he wrote. "It understands who is listening." The tape began to dominate Leon's life in ways that terrified those closest to him. His daughter, Maria, later recalled evenings when she returned home to find him standing motionless in front of a reel spinning in silence. "He would stare at it like it was breathing," she said years later. His colleagues noticed his physical health deteriorating, dark circles under his eyes, pale skin, sudden weight loss. Some whispered that Leon was chasing something he couldn't hope to understand, and it was breaking him. Leon also began speaking of visions. In his journal, he described seeing a choir of figures, children dressed in white robes, mouths open but producing no air, singing inside a chapel of stone that was not of this world. He claimed the voices on the tape were not recordings in the conventional sense, but echoes of memory trapped in sound. "They are the voices of the dead," he wrote. "And they want their song returned." As Leon's mental state worsened, Merrick tried to intervene. He urged Leon to share the tape with another researcher, to publish their findings, to remove the burden from himself. But Leon refused, telling Merrick, "If they are heard by the wrong ears, they will be silenced forever." His behavior became erratic. He began avoiding daylight, working at night with heavy curtains drawn. The lab smelled faintly of incense and rust, and some who visited said they felt inexplicable chills. By late 1973, Leon's colleagues at the university began whispering that he was losing his mind. His lectures contained more metaphor than science, filled with phrases like "sound that remembers pain" and "memory without flesh." His notes contained drawings of strange symbols overlaid with musical scores. A few accused him of slipping into madness, but others feared that Leon was closer to discovering something truly dangerous. The breaking point came on a stormy night in November. Merrick found Leon in the lab, standing before the spinning reel, his face pale and unblinking. Leon was whispering under his breath, repeating fragments of the choir's song. Merrick tried to pull him away, but Leon resisted, murmuring, "They told me to wait, they are almost ready." The next morning, Leon Wojcik was gone. His apartment was empty except for his journals and the tape reel still spinning softly on the deck. The door was locked from the inside. No note, no explanation, nothing but the tape. When Merrick attempted to play the recording, the sound was different. The choir's song was slower, heavier, almost pleading. And then, unmistakably, the voice came again, Leon's voice, calling Marek's name. The disappearance of Dr. Leon Wojcik became a quiet scandal within academic circles, quietly buried. Officially, it was recorded as an unexplained absence. But among those who had worked with him, the story became a warning. Leon had crossed the line between science and something else entirely, a threshold no man was meant to cross. Years later, Merrick would tell investigators, the tape was not just a sound. It was a door. And Leon, he walked through it. The world would never hear from Leon again. But the tape, the choir, remained. Waiting. The disappearance of Dr. Leon Wojcik sent ripples through academic and local circles, but the trail of answers was swallowed in silence. Within weeks, the Polish authorities quietly stepped in. Official records claim the investigation was brief, citing a lack of leads, but documents obtained decades later suggest there was far more at stake than a missing scientist. The St. Agnes tape, alongside Leon's personal notes, had vanished from the university archives. What remained were whispers and fragments of a mystery that refused to die. The case was first taken up by the Krakow Police Department, who approached it with standard procedure. Merrick was interviewed at length. He told them about Leon's obsession with the choir, about the strange changes in the tape, and about Leon's final days. But Merrick was evasive about certain details, the moments he'd seen Leon standing in darkness, speaking to nothing but the spinning reel, and the final playback in which Leon's own voice seemed to answer. Police notes marked Marek's testimony as inconsistent. No official follow-up was made. The monastery ruins were sealed off once more, now officially considered a dangerous site. Entry was prohibited under the guise of safety concerns. No further archaeological work was permitted, and the metal casing containing the tape was taken by the state, never to be officially catalogued. The Ministry of Culture labeled the case a matter of classified research, but no public explanation was ever given. Within academic circles, speculation ranged from dismissed hoaxes to whispered warnings about something beyond science. But not everyone obeyed the closure. Among a small network of underground archivists and sound researchers, the story of the tape became a legend. One of them was Jan Kowalski, a retired sound engineer with a reputation for collecting forbidden audio. Kowalski had worked briefly with Leon, and he was certain the tape contained something extraordinary. He began discreetly searching for it. Over years of inquiries and quiet transactions, Jan eventually acquired a copy of the reel, smuggled from a secure university storage before the ministry could destroy it. Jan kept the copy hidden in his basement, playing it rarely, but always under strict conditions. His notes indicate that every playback altered the sound. The choir's tone seemed to shift depending on who listened and where the tape was played. This wasn't a matter of distortion, the changes were deliberate. Sometimes the song became a sorrowful lament, other times a chanting so sharp it seemed to cut through the air. And always, there were whispers, soft, fragmented, speaking in languages Jan could not identify. In 1998, Jan recorded a chilling occurrence. During one playback, the choir shifted pitch, and distinct voices emerged, voices of individuals Jan knew personally. One name rang clear, Leon. Then another, quieter voice said, "They are calling you." Terrified, Jan sealed the reel away. Yet word of its existence spread quietly through small forums and private gatherings of sound researchers. The story became an urban legend, passed among those who dealt with forbidden recordings. By the early 2000s, fragments of the St. Agnes recording surfaced online. They circulated briefly before being removed, sometimes by the uploaders themselves, sometimes by unknown forces. Those who managed to hear them described intense experiences, visions of abandoned cathedrals, feelings of being observed, sudden emotional breakdowns. Some claimed the voices were calling to them directly. Others swore the tape induced vivid dreams in which they stood inside the ruined monastery, surrounded by the choir. The investigation, or rather, the suppression, of the tape deepened the mystery. No official records explained why the Ministry of Culture had confiscated all related materials. No authority would confirm the existence of the Gloria Dei recording. Instead, the story persisted in whispered circles, growing into an elusive legend. Researchers who tried to locate the tape met dead ends, their inquiries ignored or dismissed. Even Merrick vanished from the public record, retreating into obscurity. Jan Kowalski's final notes suggest something disturbing. He claimed that the tape itself had become impossible to catalog. "It moves," he wrote. "It exists outside of paper, outside of memory. It chooses who hears it and when." His warning was clear: some recordings were never meant to be heard. The mystery of the St. Agnes tape seemed to end there, until, decades later, a copy resurfaced on the dark corners of the internet. An anonymous upload carried the full 39 minutes of the choir. But what followed would not only reignite the investigation, it would deepen the terror. Because, according to those who played it, the choir now sang voices that had never been there before, including one voice that belonged unmistakably to Dr. Leon Wojcik. And just like that, the investigation began again, this time without a clear path forward. By the early 2000s, the St. Agnes tape had passed into legend, whispered among archivists and sound engineers as one of the most disturbing mysteries of modern history. It was no longer simply a relic of a ruined monastery, it had become an obsession for a select few scientists who believed the recording contained something far beyond the reach of ordinary explanation. In 2003, a coalition of acoustic researchers, led by Dr. Katarzyna Nowicka at the University of Warsaw, obtained a digital copy of the tape through unofficial channels. What they discovered would challenge the very foundation of their understanding of sound. The first step was to analyze the recording using modern technology. They loaded the digital file into advanced spectrographic software. At first glance, the waveform resembled nothing extraordinary: peaks, troughs, harmonics typical of polyphonic music. But when they ran a high-resolution analysis, they noticed something unprecedented. The choir's sound contained overlapping frequencies that did not correspond to human vocal production. The harmonics extended far beyond the upper and lower limits of the human voice, into ultrasonic ranges as well as deep subsonic layers. This meant the choir was producing sounds that could not physically be generated by any living creature. Even more disturbing was the structure of these frequencies. When visualized, the waveform was not random, it formed complex geometric patterns, fractals that echoed the architectural layouts of ancient cathedrals. Dr. Nowicka later described it as sound with architecture, as if the music itself was shaped by sacred geometry. The patterns repeated, layer upon layer, suggesting intentional design, something more than mere chance or human error. The researchers experimented further, isolating different frequency bands. They found that certain bands produced physical effects in the listener. Low subsonic tones caused subtle vibrations in the body, almost like a pulse. Ultrasonic tones, though inaudible to the ear, seemed to influence brainwave activity, producing a sensation described by test subjects as a presence in the room. One acoustic physicist involved in the study noted, "This is not sound as we know it. This is something designed to be felt, to be remembered." Perhaps most unnerving of all was the discovery of a pattern the researchers dubbed the breath signature. Within the choir's harmonics, there was a rhythm matching human respiration, steady and deliberate, but without any accompanying vocal cord activity. It was as though the choir's song carried the echo of living breath without the body to produce it. This finding deepened the mystery: who, or what, was singing? For many scientists, the natural explanation was that the tape was a sophisticated hoax, perhaps an elaborate composition designed to trick analysis. But others proposed far stranger theories. Dr. Nowicka herself suggested the possibility of acoustic quantum entanglement, a phenomenon in which sound could be imprinted into physical matter, storing not just the sound itself but the memory of the space where it was produced. The monastery was not destroyed, she wrote in her notes. It was preserved, as a vessel for the sound. Adding to the intrigue, Leon Wojcik's old notes resurfaced during the research. His journals described the choir as voices that remember suffering, trapped in stone, waiting to be released. Nowicka found herself returning again and again to those words, wondering whether Leon had come close to understanding something no science had yet explained. But the experiment was not without consequence. Members of the research team reported strange phenomena during playback. Some described hearing voices in their own language layered beneath the choir. Others reported vivid dreams of ancient chapels filled with chanting children. One technician collapsed during analysis, whispering about a sound that remembers pain. These experiences echoed Leon's own accounts, raising disturbing questions about the tape's influence. The emotional heart of the investigation came when Dr. Nowicka invited Leon's daughter, Maria, to listen to the tape for the first time. As the choir swelled in the lab, she froze. Her eyes filled with tears. "That's my father," she whispered. "It's his lullaby." She insisted she could hear him singing beneath the choir, a soft, protective song he had sung to her when she was a child. This revelation transformed the project from scientific inquiry into something far more personal. The tape was no longer merely a strange artifact, it was a vessel of memory and grief, resonating with something deeply human. Before long, Dr. Nowicka began receiving anonymous emails containing fragments of the St. Agnes recording, some altered in ways that no one could explain. These fragments contained new voices, voices that were not there before. The pattern was clear, the choir was not static. It evolved, it adapted. It responded. By the end of their analysis, the researchers were unanimous on one chilling fact: the St. Agnes tape was not just a recording. It was a living sound. And it had chosen to speak again. By the mid-2000s, the St. Agnes tape had transcended from an obscure relic into a subject of quiet obsession for a small but growing network of researchers, sound engineers, and conspiracy theorists. Whispers about the choir spread across forums, private archives, and clandestine gatherings. The tape itself had never been officially released, yet fragments had appeared, often under strange circumstances, on the deep web. Each fragment seemed to carry a different version of the choir's song, and every new version brought with it something unnervingly personal. The phenomenon began with researchers who played the fragments in isolated conditions. They reported hearing voices interwoven beneath the choir that were not on any previous version. Sometimes the whispers were in Latin, other times in Polish or archaic dialects no one could identify. A few researchers claimed to hear words directed specifically at them, their names, personal fears, or fragments of their own memories. One sound technician described it as an echo of my own thoughts being sung back to me. The effect was not limited to researchers. He found what he called the whisper layer, a consistent, low-level subharmonic hidden within the choir's frequencies. When isolated and amplified, the whisper layer formed distinct phrases. The words were incomplete, fragmented, but recurring phrases such as, "return the song," and, "they are waiting," were clear. This discovery sparked a new wave of interest in the tape, attracting not only acoustic scientists but linguists, cryptographers, and even paranormal researchers. Among them was Dr. Marek Szymanski, a linguist fascinated by the fragment's language patterns. Marek believed the choir's song was layered with a language unknown to modern science, one that was both archaic and synthetic. "It's not just music," he said. "It's encoded speech. A message within the sound." The idea of a hidden message only deepened the mystery. Who could have created such a thing? Was it the work of the nuns of St. Agnes, as local legend suggested? Was it some lost experiment in acoustic technology from the war years? Or something else entirely, something beyond human understanding? Then came the unnerving reports. Several researchers began to experience auditory hallucinations after prolonged exposure to the fragments. Marek himself admitted that after listening to a copy late one night, he began hearing faint chanting even in silence. "It's in the air now," he said. "Like a memory of sound. It doesn't leave you." These claims echoed Leon Wojcik's own descriptions before his disappearance, that the choir was not simply recorded sound, but a living presence. By now, the St. Agnes fragments were no longer confined to academic study, they were part of a growing underground phenomenon. Copies circulated quietly among enthusiasts, their origins untraceable, often accompanied by warnings, "Do not listen alone. Do not listen in the dark." Some even claimed the fragments could alter consciousness, opening a doorway to something unseen. But the most chilling development came when Marek Szymanski analyzed the latest fragment. In the background of the choir, buried beneath layers of harmonics and whispers, he detected something unmistakable, a voice. A voice that was not part of the original recording. It was human. It was urgent. And it was calling his name. Marek recorded his findings and sealed them away. In his notes, he wrote simply, "They are speaking to us now. And they are patient." What the researchers did not yet understand was that the whispers and the static were not random. They were the choir's call. And the call was growing stronger. Those who stumbled across fragments online reported strange experiences. Some described sudden emotional episodes, crying without cause, overwhelming feelings of nostalgia, grief, or guilt. Others reported physical sensations, a vibration through the chest, pressure in the ears, or chills that ran along the spine. A small minority claimed the fragments drove them to nightmares of a cathedral that didn't exist, where voiceless figures stood in a circle, singing without breath. The changes in the fragments themselves were equally puzzling. Digital analysis revealed that every copy, every upload, carried a slightly different spectral signature. The differences were not random noise or degradation, they were intentional, structured alterations, as though the recording was evolving. In technical terms, the fragments demonstrated properties of a living waveform, responding to the conditions under which they were played. One of the most startling discoveries came from an acoustic engineer in Berlin, who had compared over a dozen fragments. He found what he called the whisper layer, a consistent, low-level subharmonic hidden within the choir's frequencies. When isolated and amplified, the whisper layer formed distinct phrases. The words were incomplete, fragmented, but recurring phrases such as, "return the song," and, "they are waiting," were clear. This discovery sparked a new wave of interest in the tape, attracting not only acoustic scientists but linguists, cryptographers, and even paranormal researchers. Among them was Dr. Marek Szymanski, a linguist fascinated by the fragment's language patterns. Marek believed the choir's song was layered with a language unknown to modern science, one that was both archaic and synthetic. "It's not just music," he said. "It's encoded speech. A message within the sound." The idea of a hidden message only deepened the mystery. Who could have created such a thing? Was it the work of the nuns of St. Agnes, as local legend suggested? Was it some lost experiment in acoustic technology from the war years? Or something else entirely, something beyond human understanding? Then came the unnerving reports. Several researchers began to experience auditory hallucinations after prolonged exposure to the fragments. Marek himself admitted that after listening to a copy late one night, he began hearing faint chanting even in silence. "It's in the air now," he said. "Like a memory of sound. It doesn't leave you." These claims echoed Leon Wojcik's own descriptions before his disappearance, that the choir was not simply recorded sound, but a living presence. By now, the St. Agnes fragments were no longer confined to academic study, they were part of a growing underground phenomenon. Copies circulated quietly among enthusiasts, their origins untraceable, often accompanied by warnings, "Do not listen alone. Do not listen in the dark." Some even claimed the fragments could alter consciousness, opening a doorway to something unseen. But the most chilling development came when Marek Szymanski analyzed the latest fragment. In the background of the choir, buried beneath layers of harmonics and whispers, he detected something unmistakable, a voice. A voice that was not part of the original recording. It was human. It was urgent. And it was calling his name. Marek recorded his findings and sealed them away. In his notes, he wrote simply, "They are speaking to us now. And they are patient." What the researchers did not yet understand was that the whispers and the static were not random. They were the choir's call. And the call was growing stronger. By 2010, the mystery of the St. Agnes tape had reached a level that defied not only science but sanity. Researchers across Europe and North America had heard fragments of the choir, some in secret laboratories, others in private collections. Each report echoed the same unsettling truth: the voices on the recording were unlike anything the human voice could produce. They were harmonies without origin, layers of sound that seemed alive, shifting in tone and texture depending on who listened. This was no longer an academic puzzle, it was a phenomenon that challenged the very nature of sound and perception. One of the most significant breakthroughs came from Dr. Elias Novak, an experimental physicist specializing in acoustic anomalies. Novak had been studying the St. Agnes fragments for years and began an experiment that would change the conversation entirely. He built a sound chamber designed to isolate and amplify specific frequency ranges. Within that chamber, he played a fragment under controlled conditions while monitoring brain activity of the listeners. He found what he called the whisper layer, a consistent, low-level subharmonic hidden within the choir's frequencies. When isolated and amplified, the whisper layer formed distinct phrases. The words were incomplete, fragmented, but recurring phrases such as, "return the song," and, "they are waiting," were clear. This discovery sparked a new wave of interest in the tape, attracting not only acoustic scientists but linguists, cryptographers, and even paranormal researchers. Among them was Dr. Marek Szymanski, a linguist fascinated by the fragment's language patterns. Marek believed the choir's song was layered with a language unknown to modern science, one that was both archaic and synthetic. "It's not just music," he said. "It's encoded speech. A message within the sound." The idea of a hidden message only deepened the mystery. Who could have created such a thing? Was it the work of the nuns of St. Agnes, as local legend suggested? Was it some lost experiment in acoustic technology from the war years? Or something else entirely, something beyond human understanding? Then came the unnerving reports. Several researchers began to experience auditory hallucinations after prolonged exposure to the fragments. Merrick himself admitted that after listening to a copy late one night, he began hearing faint chanting even in silence. "It's in the air now," he said. "Like a memory of sound. It doesn't leave you." These claims echoed Leon Wojcik's own descriptions before his disappearance, that the choir was not simply recorded sound, but a living presence. By now, the St. Agnes fragments were no longer confined to academic study, they were part of a growing underground phenomenon. Copies circulated quietly among enthusiasts, their origins untraceable, often accompanied by warnings: do not listen alone. Do not listen in the dark. Some even claimed the fragments could alter consciousness, opening a doorway to something unseen. But the most chilling development came when Marek Szymanski analyzed the latest fragment. In the background of the choir, buried beneath layers of harmonics and whispers, he detected something unmistakable: a voice. A voice that was not part of the original recording. It was human. It was urgent. And it was calling his name. Marek recorded his findings and sealed them away. In his notes, he wrote simply, "They are speaking to us now. And they are patient." What the researchers did not yet understand was that the whispers and the static were not random. They were the choir's call. And the call was growing stronger. What he found was extraordinary: certain harmonics from the choir triggered identical neural responses in every subject, responses associated with memory, emotion, and even language comprehension. Novak concluded that the choir's song contained an encoded language, one that was not constructed by vocal cords but by a form of sonic memory embedded in the fabric of the sound itself. "It is as though the voices are calling from within us," Novak explained. "This is not simply music. It is consciousness carried in vibration." But the implications were far darker. Some of Novak's test subjects began showing signs of psychological distress after prolonged exposure. One researcher described waking in the middle of the night to find themselves humming the choir's melody involuntarily. Others reported dreams of a cathedral filled with children singing without breath, and waking with a deep sense of sorrow. One subject even claimed the voices spoke directly to them, urging them toward a specific location in Poland, near the ruins of St. Agnes. Novak documented these findings carefully, but his work attracted unwanted attention. The Ministry of Culture, aware of Leon Wojcik's disappearance decades earlier, began issuing warnings to researchers. Novak received official letters demanding the destruction of his recordings and notes. Some colleagues quietly withdrew from the project, citing concerns for their safety. Others became convinced they were being watched. Novak himself began noticing patterns in his experiments, changes in the choir's harmonics that corresponded to the number of listeners in the chamber and their emotional state. The phenomenon was spreading beyond laboratories. Online forums dedicated to the St. Agnes tape began to proliferate, where users shared recordings and personal experiences. Many reported hearing personal voices, phrases in their own language embedded within the static. One listener uploaded a fragment and later claimed they had heard their childhood nickname whispered back to them. Another said the voices were repeating the last words of a loved one who had passed away. Amid this growing wave of strange testimonies, a linguist named Anna Grabowski proposed a chilling theory. She suggested that the choir was not just a message, it was a form of communication designed to reach individual listeners on a personal level. "It's as if the recording adapts," she said. "It learns who is listening and speaks directly to them." Anna's theory was supported when she isolated certain layers of the recording that appeared to contain irregular pulse patterns, patterns matching the heartbeat of listeners in the room. This discovery suggested the choir's voices could resonate with the biological rhythms of its audience. The choir was not only heard, it was physically and mentally experienced. The implications were staggering. If Anna was correct, the St. Agnes tape was not a static artifact but a dynamic, living phenomenon. And the choir was not merely singing, they were communicating. The question haunting everyone involved in the research was the same: what are they trying to say? The answer, it seemed, would not come through science alone. It would require stepping deeper into the ruins of the monastery, into the place where the choir was born. And that step would bring them face to face with a truth no one could explain. By 2015, the St. Agnes tape had become more than a mystery. It was an obsession that had drawn a network of researchers, sound engineers, and amateur explorers into a dangerous pursuit. Stories of its strange effects had spread, and fragments of the recording circulated in hidden corners of the internet, often accompanied by dire warnings. But for some, the only way to understand the phenomenon was to return to its origin, to the ruined monastery where it had been discovered. That year, a small expedition was organized under the guise of a private research project. The team included Dr. Katarzyna Nowicka, linguist Anna Grabowski, acoustic physicist Dr. Elias Novak, and Marek Szymanski, the last living person who had worked with Leon Wojcik. Their stated goal was to re-examine the ruins of St. Agnes with modern technology in order to discover how the tape was created. Few knew that the group was also driven by a deeper, more personal mission, to confront the voices themselves. The journey to the monastery was quiet, their route taking them through dense forests and abandoned villages. Locals warned them not to go, speaking in hushed tones of the chapel as a place of lingering grief and unnatural sound. "The choir is still there," one villager told them. "You don't hear them, but they hear you." These words followed them like shadows as they approached the ruins under a steel-gray sky. Upon arrival, the group found the monastery sealed, its ruins even more desolate than the records had suggested. Time had not been kind. Stone walls had crumbled, and vines crept across broken arches. Yet certain parts of the structure remained intact, most notably a section of wall behind the altar. It was here that Leon Wojcik had first found the metal casing containing the tape. Nowicka brought her own recording equipment, Novak his frequency scanners, and Anna her linguistic analysis tools. Marek carried only a notebook and an expression that suggested he feared what lay ahead. They began their work by setting up in the central chamber. The air inside was thick and cold, as though the ruins themselves were breathing. Novak detected strange acoustic properties, certain frequencies resonating in ways that should have been impossible in open ruins. Anna recorded faint whispers beneath the wind, words that dissolved when repeated aloud. Marek kept insisting they were being watched. Katarzyna noted that the atmosphere felt different from any other ruin she had ever entered. The sound environment was alive. At dusk, they began playback of the most complete version of the St. Agnes tape they had assembled. As the choir began, the effect was immediate. The sound filled the chamber, not as a simple recording but as a living presence, vibrating through walls and bone. The harmonics seemed to pulse in rhythm with their breathing, enveloping them in a chorus that was both beautiful and unbearable. Then the whispers began, soft, fractured, coming not from the speakers but from within the stone itself. The group could hear words in multiple languages, including Latin, Polish, and something unidentifiable. Marek heard his own name whispered clearly. Anna heard her late mother's voice. Katarzyna felt something brush against her mind, a sensation she could not name. Novak detected a change in the frequencies, as if the sound was responding to their presence. The group spent hours listening, each hour stretching into something timeless. The choir seemed to evolve with every playback. At one point, Anna stopped recording and whispered, "It's speaking to us." Not singing. Speaking. The others fell silent, unable to dispute the feeling that the sound was a message they were on the brink of understanding. As night fell, the chamber grew colder. The choir grew louder, and the whispers sharper, until they became words that none of them could ignore. "Return the song. Finish what was begun." Suddenly, the tape cut out. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the sound of their own breathing. The chamber seemed to exhale. Marek looked toward the altar and said quietly, "It's waiting for us to go deeper." That night, the team decided to explore beneath the ruins. Behind the broken altar wall, they found a narrow passageway that had never been recorded in any excavation notes. It descended into darkness, carrying with it a faint, almost imperceptible hum, the sound of the choir, still singing without breath. They stepped inside. The passageway beneath St. Agnes was narrow, cold, and filled with the scent of earth and something older, something metallic, as if the air itself carried memory. The team moved slowly, their headlamps cutting thin swaths of light through the darkness. The further they descended, the more the air seemed to vibrate. At first it was subtle, like a faint hum. But with each step, the sound grew stronger, until it became unmistakable, the choir. Not from the tape, but from somewhere deep within the stone itself. The walls of the passage were carved in shapes unlike any Gothic design the group had ever seen. They twisted into spirals, fractals, and geometric patterns that seemed to pulse in time with the sound. Anna Grabowski photographed the carvings, noting symbols that matched fragments from Leon Wojcik's journals. They appeared to be not merely decoration, but part of a structure designed to channel sound. "This is acoustic architecture," Novak murmured, his voice trembling. "It was built to hold a song." As they reached the bottom of the descent, they found themselves in a vast chamber. The roof arched high above them, carved from stone in a perfect dome. It was empty except for an altar-like structure at its center. Around it, the air seemed to shimmer, carrying the choir's song without a speaker or device. The sound was fuller here, richer, as if amplified by the chamber itself. It was not just hearing, it was immersion, a physical sensation of sound that filled every fiber of their bodies. Katarzyna Nowicka stepped forward and placed her hand on the altar. The vibration under her fingers was undeniable. Novak began scanning the space, but his equipment failed to register normal readings. The choir's sound was not merely waves of air, it seemed to exist in layers outside conventional physics. Marek Szymanski, pale and silent, was writing frantically in his notebook. He muttered over and over, "It's a door. It's a voice. They are here." Anna's recording equipment began to pick up faint whispers underneath the choir. She isolated them and found fragments of language she could not identify, though some syllables repeated. One phrase stood out, voca sine carne, Latin for, voice without flesh. The words chilled the group. Leon Wojcik's descriptions of the choir were echoing back to them with terrifying precision. Suddenly, the sound shifted. The choir's melody broke apart, the harmonics twisting into sharp, dissonant tones. A voice rose above them, not in song, but in speech. It was deep, layered, and carried a strange cadence. It spoke a single word repeatedly, return. The team froze. The word seemed to resonate in the stone, vibrating inside their skulls. Marek stepped closer to the altar, as if drawn by force. "They want the song finished," he whispered. His eyes were wide with a kind of fear that went beyond reason. Novak adjusted his equipment frantically, scanning the altar, the walls, the air. This is a chamber built for sound to live. Not to be recorded. To be returned. At that moment, the choir's song swelled into a crescendo so overwhelming it seemed to fracture reality. The chamber itself trembled. The air grew heavy, the vibration so intense it was almost unbearable. Lights flickered in their headlamps. Then, as suddenly as it began, the sound stopped. Silence pressed down on them, thick and absolute. Katarzyna looked around, her breath visible in the cold air. "We should leave," she said softly. But Marek shook his head. His voice was distant, almost trance-like, "They are waiting for the song to be completed." The group stood in silence, each feeling the weight of the choice before them. Somewhere in the darkness, beyond sight, the choir was still singing. And the chamber beneath St. Agnes was alive. The decision to descend into the chamber beneath St. Agnes had not been taken lightly. For days before the expedition, the team had debated whether to even attempt it. The stories surrounding the choir, the voices without flesh, the whispers in the static, the strange disappearances, were not just unsettling, they were warnings. Yet curiosity, perhaps mixed with something deeper, drove them forward. By the time they stepped into the chamber, each member knew this could be the point of no return. The air was different here, denser, colder, and carrying a vibration that seemed to hum beneath their skin. Every step they took echoed with a resonance that was not their own. Marek Szymanski led the way, his headlamp illuminating carvings that grew more intricate the deeper they ventured. These were not random patterns but elaborate sequences that spiraled along the stone, seeming to guide them toward the altar at the heart of the chamber. As they approached the altar, the choir's sound grew stronger. This was not sound as they had heard before, it was immersion itself. The voices seemed to flow around them, inside them. They could not tell where the sound began or ended. It was living, breathing, and aware. Katarzyna Nowicka placed her hand upon the altar again and felt a subtle pulse, a rhythm that matched her own heartbeat. Novak checked his instruments and found readings he could not explain. The chamber was a resonator, a living instrument built to contain something far beyond human understanding. Marek began speaking softly, almost to himself. They told my father. They told Leon. Now they are telling me. It's the song. We must finish it. The others looked at him with unease. Katarzyna asked what he meant, but Marek only shook his head, his eyes fixed on the altar as if it held some hidden truth. The choir, he said quietly, is unfinished. It calls for completion. Anna Grabowski began recording, documenting everything. Her microphone picked up the choir's layers more clearly here, and beneath them, something even stranger, a whispering in languages no one could identify. The phrase, Voka Sine Karn, repeated again and again, faint yet undeniable. Anna noted in her journal that the phrase seemed to be the key to the entire mystery, voice without flesh. It was not just a description, it was a command. For hours they stayed in the chamber, listening. The choir shifted constantly, harmonies evolving as if aware of their presence. The voices became more distinct, some soft and childlike, others deep and solemn. Occasionally, they seemed to speak words in Polish, Latin, and other tongues that none of the researchers recognized. The words were fragmented, but their tone carried urgency. This was not music in the ordinary sense, it was communication, a message encoded in sound. As night deepened, the chamber seemed to react to them. The air grew heavier, and the vibration stronger. Marek stepped toward the altar again, this time without hesitation. He placed both hands on the stone surface and closed his eyes. They are here, he murmured. They are waiting for me. Suddenly, the choir surged, filling the chamber with a sound so intense it was almost unbearable. The vibration became a physical force pressing against their bodies, and the whispers rose into coherent speech. The voices spoke in unison, return the song. Complete it. Sing it again. Katarzyna's breath caught. Complete it, she repeated, unsure whether she was speaking aloud or hearing her own thoughts echoed. Marek nodded without opening his eyes. That is why Leon disappeared. That is why this place exists. The choir is a song trapped between worlds. It must be finished, or it will call forever. Novak looked at his equipment, baffled. But how do you finish a song without knowing its beginning, he asked. The choir answered, softly this time, almost tenderly, with a voice that seemed to come from inside their own heads, follow the breath. The team exchanged uneasy glances. Anna recorded the phrase, whispering it into her notebook. It became clear that they had come to the threshold of something beyond science, something metaphysical. The chamber was not simply a site of historical curiosity, it was an altar to an unfinished invocation, and the choir was the invocation's voice. Marek moved as though in a trance toward the center of the altar, placing his hands upon it again. The choir's song rose to a fever pitch, and the vibration in the chamber became overwhelming. The air shimmered, and the stone around them seemed to breathe. It was as if the chamber itself was awakening. Then Marek began to sing. It was not a song in any human language. His voice was raw, trembling, and filled with emotion, yet it matched the choir's harmonies perfectly. One by one, others joined, not in conscious agreement, but drawn into the sound as if compelled. Katarzyna, Anna, Novak, they all found themselves singing without planning to, their voices merging with the choir in a chorus that transcended speech. The effect was instantaneous and profound. The sound in the chamber changed, becoming richer, deeper, and impossibly beautiful. The vibration intensified until it seemed to dissolve the very air. The choir's voice and theirs were no longer separate, they had become one. Then, abruptly, it stopped. Silence crashed over them. The air felt hollow. Marek collapsed to his knees, exhausted, whispering, "It is done." Katarzyna checked her recorder. The choir was gone. Where once there had been a living sound, there was now silence. The carvings in the stone seemed dull, lifeless. The chamber felt empty, as if it had released something and closed itself. But Marek was not silent. He looked up at them with eyes wide and pale. "They are waiting," he said simply. "For the next song." The team left the chamber quietly, the weight of what had happened pressing on them. Outside, the ruins were still, the wind carrying only distant echoes of something once sung. They knew they had crossed a threshold, one that could never be uncrossed. The St. Agnes choir had been completed. But its story was far from over. Somewhere, beyond hearing, beyond understanding, the voices still waited.